I'd like to begin, if I may, by reading a few lines from a book. This book, Othello by William Shakespeare. "'Tis in ourselves that we are thus, or thus. Our bodies are our gardens, to the which our wills are gardeners. The power and corrigible authority of this lies in our wills." A few years ago, a student closed the book we were reading in class, this one, and asked, quite loudly, "What's the point of studying literature?" Fair enough, really. I teach literature, which means I spend a lot of my life trying to convince teenagers to care deeply about people and places that may or may not exist, often at inconvenient times of the day, like early in the morning, or mid-morning, or in the afternoon. But being a teacher of literature, there was only ever one way I was going to interpret the theme of this event. And a lot of my presentation today is just an elaboration of what I told my student that day. What I hope is that by our shared exploration of these worlds and their inhabitants, my students learn to feel responsibility for lives they have never lived, for injustices they have never experienced, for futures they may never fully see, for other people's gardens, so to speak. Our theme is beyond the horizon, and the horizon is a useful way of thinking about human limitation. You can see the horizon, you can move towards the horizon, but you never fully reach it. But reading literature can quietly and decisively move us beyond the horizon of our own experience. Now, I didn't grow up with much, but there were still books. There was the strange collection of Penguin paperbacks from the 60s my dad had from university, and there was a public library card that my mum insisted we use from a very young age. That combination quietly expanded my horizons beyond the depressing black hole it could have been. The horizon is the limit of what we can see from where we stand. And all of us stand in a very specific place, a very small circle of one historical moment, one culture, one family, one body. And this personal experience feels complete because it's immediate. And knowledge from experience does feel powerful and convincing, but it's also profoundly limited. Despite that limitation, we still use it to pass moral, political, ethical judgments on people beyond our daily horizons. And considering how much difficulty we can have understanding the people within our immediate horizon, that seems ambitious. So the question becomes, how can we engage responsibly with a world larger than ourselves? Reading literature is one answer. When we read a novel, we do something rare. We perform a bit of a magic trick. We inhabit another consciousness. We sit inside another person's fears, assumptions, contradictions. We experience circumstances we have never faced. We feel the pain and fear of a creature that never asked to be created or abandoned. We feel the panic of an Afghan refugee trying to make his way to freedom. We feel the desperation of a woman whose identity is deemed surplus to requirements. And importantly, we do all this slowly. Reading requires attention and humility, the recognition that the lives we have led are not universal, that our horizons do not apply to all. It allows us to encounter injustice without causing it, to witness power without wielding it, to feel the consequences of actions without causing them. And in doing so, it quietly challenges what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie calls the single story, the way that a single narrative told often enough comes to stand in for complex reality. The single story is dangerous, not just because it is false. It's dangerous because it's incomplete, but it feels complete, that it's described the full curve of the horizon. Reading widely destabilizes this assumption and prepares us for uncertainty. Each new voice we encounter in each act of reading is one that says, here's another way of seeing. here's another horizon. Now, stories don't offer neat resolutions, and that incompleteness, that discomfort, it's not a flaw in literature. It's a simulacrum of reality. Literature is often where societies first feel the consequences of both change and stagnation. When students read In the Sea There Are Crocodiles, they're not just reading about a refugee's journey. They are learning about hope and resilience, as well as the violence of borders drawn on maps. That matters. When they read To Kill a Mockingbird, they are not reading a reassuring moral text about good people doing the right thing. They're learning about the limits of human goodness inside an unjust system. Atticus Finch does almost all the right things, and it still isn't enough. That discomfort is the point. That matters. Frankenstein, it's not about monsters. It's about creation without responsibility. It's about power without accountability. That matters. Reading doesn't just tell us what happens, what's going to happen. It places us inside ways of thinking and feeling that are not our own. And that matters because the future is not going to feel familiar when we arrive in it. And literature trains us for that. Literature trains patience. It teaches us to accept doubt without collapsing into cynicism. And that capacity to remain thoughtful and empathetic in the face of complexity is essential as we move beyond the horizon of our present moment. Now, my student that day, along with many others, and including me, also asked, why this? Why do we have to study this? I work within institutional horizons. There are syllabi, there are assessment objectives, so many assessment objectives. There are time constraints. There's a canon of worthy works. Institutions, educational institutions, like individuals, have horizons. And education fails when we treat that horizon as a set and unchanging point in human experience. A static, monolithic canon risks becoming a very prestigious single story that doesn't just exclude voices, but trains us to mistake the familiar for the universal. Reading responsibly means understanding that no set of texts can fully capture all of human experience. When we treat the canon as complete, we risk shrinking our collective field of vision. We narrow our horizons. This isn't an argument against structure. It's an invitation to keep the horizons open, to seek out stories that unsettle as well as affirm. Because the more varied the stories we encounter, the less likely we are to mistake the familiar for the universal. Now, there's often a question in education about the role that education or that literature has. If the future is shaped by science, technology, innovation, what role does literature have? And there are those who say that it has none. And to them I ask, what happens if we can produce brilliant engineers who have never learned to inhabit another person's perspective? What happens if we design powerful technologies without rehearsing ethical complexity? What happens if we can calculate risk, but we have never learned to feel responsibility? I would argue that a quick glance at the headlines suggests one possible outcome to this. Imagination, moral reflection, and narrative understanding are not opposites to technical skill. They're companions to it. If we teach students only how to solve problems, but not how to imagine consequences, then we are sending them unskilled into an unknowable future. When my students read, even my awkward anti-Shakespeare students, they're not just studying text, they're practicing how to live in a world larger than themselves. You don't read to escape reality, you read to meet it more fully. Each poem, each book, is a small act of horizon expansion. a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger, and more interconnected than our own experiences would suggest. We're living through a time of unprecedented and rapid change, and these shifts can sometimes expand our external horizons faster than our internal ones. And when our capacity for empathy and complexity fails to keep pace with our capacity for power, the results can be damaging to ourselves and to those around us. Those headlines that I mentioned earlier, for example. Now, reading is a quiet act. It's not dramatic, it's not trending. I've certainly never seen an explosion of hashtag reading across the internet. But what it does do is steadily enlarge our field of vision. It reminds us that other lives are as intricate and valid as our own. Reading tells us that voices matter and that the right to be heard matters long before politics gets there. Many of the issues we see around the world, the inequalities of power, the injustices, these are not technical problems. These are failures of imagination. Failures to see people beyond our immediate horizon as fully real. And so, in closing, I want to return to a place where I have spent probably far too much of my time, the classroom. Teachers often talk about one of the most meaningful experiences in education being the light bulb moment, the moment when a student gets it. And for me, one of those moments is when a student realizes, perhaps for the first time, that other lives do not operate according to the same rules as their own. Now, I'm pretty sure I've never changed a student's mind by telling them that they're wrong, but I have seen a fictional character do it in less than 150 pages. It's Inspector Gould from An Inspector Calls, if you want to know. This may seem small, but it's also the beginning of moral imagination. Beyond the horizon of our own experiences, there are other lives, other possibilities, other struggles. And my invitation is simple. Read beyond what is required. Read beyond what is comfortable. Read beyond what confirms what you already know. Because every time you do, the horizon shifts. And expanding our horizon may be one of the most practical and quietly radical things we can do. If we want a future worth arriving in, if we want a future at all, we must keep reading the stories that challenge the things that we think we already know. Thank you.